Welcome to the fourth and final episode in a Legendarium series about the history of astrology. In Part 4, Rise of the Astronomers, we will talk about how astronomy replaced astrology as the serious science of the stars, yet astrology survived as a mystical art. During the 15th and 16th centuries, Europe moved into a revolutionary new age of exploration, art, and science. During this era, known as the Renaissance, European princes prioritized human endeavor and the sciences over religion. In this new world, astrologers found themselves in greater demand than ever before. Any king, queen, duke, or prince wanted an astrologer in their entourage. They believed astrologers could foretell their future by making their star charts. One of the most famous star charts involved one of the most famous astrologers of the age, John Dee of England. During the 1550s, Bloody Mary sat on the English throne and put her half-sister Princess Elizabeth in prison. Queen Mary contacted John Dee to create Elizabeth's star chart. To her horror, Dee predicted that Elizabeth would soon become queen. Bloody Mary put Dee in prison on charges of heresy, but before Dee went to trial, Queen Mary came down with a slight case of death, and her half-sister Elizabeth became the new queen. In gratitude, Elizabeth made Dee her royal astrologer. Did John Dee truly predict the future, or simply make a savvy political calculation based on Queen Mary's declining health? As with much about astrology, that is open to interpretation. Around Dee's time, one of the most famous astrologers, who ironically helped to end it as a serious science, began his profession. Tycho Brahe was born in Denmark during the year 1546. His rich uncle abducted him from his parents and raised him as his own. Brahe's parents knew of what happened, but they allowed it to stand, as they believed young Tycho would have a better life with the rich uncle than with them. Brahe became fascinated by astrology when a partial eclipse of the sun occurred in 1560 during his adolescence. He chose to study the stars rather than become a lawyer, as his uncle wished. While at the University of Rotek, Brahe fought a duel with fellow student Manderup Parshberg over who was the better mathematician. Parshberg sliced off Brahe's nose with a sword, and Brahe commissioned a brass nose for himself, but later claimed it to be made of gold and silver. As he grew to young manhood, Brahe kept a male elk as a pet, 7 feet long and weighing in at 700 pounds. Brahe took his elk to parties where both he and the elk became drunk. Sadly, his pet died when it drunkenly fell down a flight of stairs, but Tycho had a longer relationship with a dwarf named Jeppe, who sat at Brahe's feet during mealtimes while Tycho slipped him morsels of food every now and again. Tycho believed that Jeppe had psychic abilities, and his supposed predictions won Tycho much attention. With the blessing of King Christian IV of Denmark, Brahe built an observatory called Uraniborg on the island of Ven. The fortress-like observatory included a castle, a trapdoor, and a dungeon. Uraniborg also housed a paper mill and a printing press, among the very first in Scandinavia. Tycho published his own manuscripts using locally made paper with his very own watermark. Brahe also used instruments he designed or adapted himself to measure the position of the stars and planets, thus building a wealth of data. Like other astrologers, he consulted people on topics ranging from dream interpretation to medical issues and where to find misplaced items. Apart from his research assistants, he had soldiers and servants. However, his little monarchy fell into ruin after Brahe quarreled with the king and fled to Prague. In his late 50s, Brahe died of a bladder infection on October 24, 1601. His death gave astronomers like his assistant Johann Kepler access to his closely guarded work. Johann Kepler was born on December 27, 1571, in the imperial city of Weil der Stadt. A prematurely born child with poor health and weak eyesight, his family sank into poverty after his father, Heinrich Kepler, left home to fight Spain in the 80 Years' War and tragically never returned. Nonetheless, Kepler became obsessed with astrology and won a university scholarship. In time, he became a lecturer and assistant to Tycho Brahe, with whom he quarreled often, mostly over the fact that Brahe refused Kepler access to his wealth of data. But after Brahe's death, Johann Kepler used Brahe's observations to lay out 3 laws of planetary motion. His laws state that planets move in an elliptical orbit, they move at different speeds at different times, and they move at different rates because of their distance from the Sun. Johann Kepler included religious arguments to make his work more acceptable. He believed that God created the world according to a plan and that his 3 laws of planetary motion reflected God's design for a harmonious universe. The Italian-born Giovanni Domenico Cassini helped to finish astrology as a formal science. His studies in France led him to challenge his professor's claim that the stars held magic powers. This boldness won Cassini the attention of the Marquis Cornelio Malvasia in 1644. Malvasia appointed Cassini to the newly established Panzano Observatory. There Cassini made the initial calculations that later led to his discovery of the speed of light, the gap in the rings of Saturn, and his discovery of several new moons. Astronomy replaced astrology as the serious science of the stars. Despite this, astrology continued to play a role in popular culture as a mystical guide to earthly matters, but not as a serious science. Farmers and stock breeders in 17th century England, much like their counterparts in ancient Greece, used the stars as a guide to create healthier stock. Such persons believed that timing their animals' cycles to the stars would breed better beasts. Astrological guidelines even recommended the best times for castrating, docking, and weaning newborn animals. Even those who did not use astrology often blamed a failed breeding or unhealthy livestock on a failure of the stars, witchcraft, or some other scientifically dubious practice. After the Great Fire of London in 1666, astrologer William Lilly had to testify before Parliament to clear himself of charges. He predicted the fire and then started it to bolster his reputation. In the modern age, some have even used a form of astrology called astrocartography to help them choose an ideal place to live. Another relatively new discipline called evolutionary astrology holds that every soul is steadily evolving in a process of reincarnation. By keeping track of our astrological signs, practitioners can supposedly determine what they will reincarnate as until they reach a pure spiritual state. In this way, the mystical art of astrology has survived even though astronomy replaced it as a serious science. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.